leave by, or?
No, I mean probably yeah, 1:30. I need
Yeah,
to
yeah,
start moving on, but
yeah. Yeah.
I figure we'll be done well before then.
Sure,
So yeah,
sure,
that's
sure.
fine.
All right, we're live. So thanks for. I guess I'll start by saying I reached out, posted on Twitter asking for someone who wanted to talk to me. I reached out to some people specifically, kind of nothing came of it, and then you reached out to me and said, "Oh, I'm interested in talking to you." Um, so I guess thanks for doing that first off, because it's a bit of a vulnerable thing to kind of sit in front of someone and try to explain yourself, particularly when there's probably a bias that you think I hold. Maybe you don't. I think you would be justified if you thought I did hold that bias, specifically because of the social circles that I'm in and that the people that I know. So I think you're well justified if you did hold that bias. But would you mind just introducing yourself a little and I guess explaining why you reached out to me and the circumstances around that?
Yeah, absolutely, no worries. And thanks for chatting with me, Jack. Yeah, my name is Mitchell Brown. I'm 33 years old. I had previously worked in media, but in 2019 moved away from that, and in 2020 began working towards completing a Master of Teaching degree with a view of teaching English in a secondary school setting. But unfortunately, things being as they are, I've not been able to complete that degree. I had a job lined up that I was to take upon completing that degree. I have since lost that position. And since October 2021, so I think we're at about 6 months now, I've been out of work. I've been unable to work because I ultimately refused. There was some toing and froing. I did consider getting the vax, although it would have been very much against my wishes, but ultimately decided that that was not what I was going to do. Probably need would ideally would have been clearer about that in my mind, because I did plant some confusion in the minds of people who were expecting me to get it done for the sake of jobs and things like that. But ultimately, just said, no, look, I need to make the decision that I think is right for me. So I have been, since then, looking after my now 18-month-old daughter pretty much full time. My wife had some reservations about the vaccine herself, but ultimately ended up getting it. Has said that she won't get any more because her doubts have actually strengthened, I suppose. But she's in a position where she can continue to work. So she has gone back to work. She's pregnant again, actually, so we'll be having our second child later this
Congrats.
year. And I'm yeah, thank you. And I'm hoping things there might be a bit more of a resolution that works in my favour by then. But we're really just playing it by ear. So stay at home full time dad is my position at the moment.
And because I'm trying to cast myself back to kind of 6 months ago, or I'm probably the millionth person to say it now, but time just feels so distorted over the last probably 3 years now, really. Um, things
Absolutely.
have, it feels like a million years and like a day has passed. It's the strangest thing.
Yeah,
But
there's it's strange. Sorry if I
no, no.
can interrupt there, but yeah, there's I can't remember whose quote it was, and I'm going to be paraphrasing, but talking about spending time in jail, and they say that there were long days and fast years, and it does feel like that time seems to drag interminably sometimes, and then all of this when you're in lockdown and the like, and then all of a sudden you turn around and 2 years has just gone past,
Yeah.
and you think, what the hell just happened? So yeah, it is a strange feeling.
And I'm yeah trying to take myself back to that time. I guess before the vaccines were readily available, but when they were like some people could get them, they were in the community. There was lots of discussion about the rollout and those sort of things. And I remember thinking even then that maybe if people weren't even saying it, there was always the whisper of like, there's going to be a mandate, there's going to be a mandate, there's going to be some sort of compulsion, you have to get this done. Do you remember that sort of vibe in the air before, I guess, the actual mandates themselves started? Or am I making that up completely?
No, absolutely, absolutely. And my response to that, despite being a bit of a pessimist, as where government matters are concerned, I have not a great deal of faith in government generally, um, to respect individual liberties and that sort of thing. But I buried my head in the sand and said, not that it won't happen to you, but you don't even think about this until it directly comes for you. And I copped a bit of flack for that. Some people said that I should have, when I was given a job, I was offered a job before mandates kicked in for teachers, and there were some people who said I should have been open with the school about that at the time that I was given the position, and I disagree with that. I think that as much as you can preempt some of this sort of stuff, it's not your responsibility to think, oh, the laws could change to restrict me to having to take this vaccine.
Sure.
Therefore, I have to preempt that decision and let a prospective employer know.
And even thinking back like 2 years, when I can't think of it. There was one other time I've had to ever prove I was vaccinated, and it's when I travelled internationally. And like before they let me into the country, it was like, have you had, I think it was yellow fever or something, whatever it was. So even the idea that before a year ago that you would ever have to say to your job, oh, here's like my medical history, do you want to have a look? That So you can be forgiven is what I'm saying for, even if there was always that whisper, why would you ever account for that? Why would you account for something that's so unlike what your experience is now? It was a very strange time. I had echoes of it when I guess the third booster was coming. I was convinced they were going to mandate third boosters or third shots, whatever. And I guess they did for specifically the industry you were moving into, teachers. My understanding is they're still required to have 3 vaccines. How does that, I guess, how has that changed your view of the profession in future? So in the 5 to 10 to 20 year radius rather than more immediately?
Yeah, well, I suppose it doesn't. It's hard to know what that's going to look like. I've had a number of conversations with teachers. As you might imagine, I spend a lot of time at the park now with my daughter, and so I know a lot of mums and dads with their little kids from the area now, which is kind of a nice social thing for me too, because when you're stuck at home, you miss a lot of the social interactions that you would have in the workplace and that sort of thing. And a number of those are teachers, and without me mentioning anything about my situation, because as you might imagine, it does get draining at times, constantly telling people and dealing with their response to that, which isn't already always positive. So I don't always bring it up, but at least 2 conversations I've had with teachers, unprompted anything about mandates, they have said we are struggling for staff, and it's not because people have COVID, it's because of mandates. We've lost staff because of mandates, and I just think, well, I wonder how long they can keep it up for, because it feels as though the government at the moment is cutting off its nose to spite its face, and it feels punitive at the moment. You didn't do what we told you to do. It actually makes no difference now in terms of keeping people safe, but we're still going to not let you work. So it's hard to know what that's going to look like long term. I think probably what's been the big turn off is just how readily everybody went along with it. The schools all went along with it. The staff, some of the people that I was going through my course with, not only happily went along with it, but were pretty, if not hostile, pretty dismissive of anybody who had concerns over it. And it's this strange sort of situation where there was this mentality that we are not just educated, but we are educators, and being pro every vaccine that ever gets put out, unquestioningly is an educated position, whereas challenging it, that is a stupid, moronic position. Held by uneducated, immoral fools. And the great irony.
Sorry to stop you there for a sec, because I'm really interested in this as a broader concept. Do you think
absolutely.
a lot of the people who were kind of, I'll take your word for it, I doubt anyone was as explicit as that, right? I think it would all be under the really like insidious
I'm
kind
reading
of mean
between the
stuff.
lines. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that people doing that actually believe what they're saying, or do you think it's just like this virtue signal so the person next to them knows how good they are?
I think there's elements of both. I think a lot of that, the really openly preachy side of it, where you're not just talking about yourself and what you're doing for others around you, but being really critical of others who aren't doing it. Yeah, I think the term virtue signaling, as much as it gets overused, is probably relevant there. But I do think that they genuinely believe it as well. And for every one of those people, there are a lot more people who are probably just saying, "Yep, I'll go along with this," and silently thinking without necessarily feeling like they need to go out of their way to say anything about it, who are silently thinking, "Yeah, okay, the people who are opposing this, like they're probably pretty dumb. They're not thinking of others." And the great irony for me is that arriving at that decision by that process actually involves no critical thought. Whether it's the right position or not is irrelevant.
Sure.
You haven't actually exercised any kind of critical thinking to get there. This person or these people proclaim to be the overlords of the science. They say this is safe and effective. Therefore, I want to be educated and scientific. So if someone is proclaiming something in the name of science, I will go along with them.
Sure.
And
I can tell
you
you.
and I were talking. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I was saying earlier. That's you've more or less described my thinking process, right? When it came to engaging with this, because I was like, you know what? I don't really care that much. I want to go to work. They're saying it's cool. I don't know anything about this. Sure, whatever. And I can. Maybe I'll start by saying I've tempered my attitude somewhat since then. But I remember when the big protests were happening in the city, I was like, these clowns, man. They're effectively rioting the streets, like causing all this chaos, all because they don't want to get a little needle, little babies. And I agree with you. It was a very uncritical process to get there. It was just kind of I have this idea where like I don't think people inherently make mistakes with their logic. I think they start from a bad place, and that where they start is pointing to where they're going to end. So if I believed that the people upstairs tell me that this is the right thing, it's all good, and I do it, that's the logic. It flows in a straight line. And I think it's the same for people that didn't do it. I think they just had a different starting point. Well, I actually don't necessarily agree with that guy. He's just telling me. And that therefore we have to restructure our whole society. Like, I guess what I'm saying now is I was much more antagonistic a year ago, and now I'm much more, I guess, understanding, or trying to be more understanding, of people who didn't engage with it in the same way that I did. I guess, have you noticed is this something that still affects you in your day today? Like, people still give you kind of weird looks if you do bring up, "Oh, I didn't get vaccinated"? For me, it's much less of an issue now than I think it was a year ago, but I imagine that's not the case for everyone,
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it has shifted a bit. Look, for the most part, I think the people around me have been pretty good. What's made it hard, and what has been far and away the most difficult thing, over and above losing work and that, because financially we're in an okay position at the moment. Fortunately, it would have affected a lot of people much worse than me. And I'm grateful that I'm not in that position. But what's been the hardest thing, I think, has been dealing with the few people really close to me who were not supportive at all, or maybe thought that they were supportive in their own way, but with this kind of proviso to that you're stupid for not getting it, and it's kind of your own fault. I feel sorry for you for what's happened to you, but you've brought this upon yourself, and you're kind of a little bit selfish in doing it anyway. So you kind of deserve it.
Do you think they're being like self-righteous?
That's been what's that? Sorry.
Do you think they're being like self-righteous about it?
Oh, there has certainly been some of that, and from people I know to have done some things in their past that make me think, you don't really have that position of moral authority to be speaking down to me from. I wouldn't presume to do it to you, and you certainly shouldn't presume to do it to me. But yeah, and that's actually been another frustrating thing, because it has shifted. And my interpretation of that has been that we got high vax rates, society opened up to everybody except people like me, and through major events and venues where people like me were not allowed to attend, cases went through the roof. There was an exponential rise in cases, and I think, and I'm saying I'm interpreting this because nobody openly says it. All of a sudden, that hostility just dropped away. All of a sudden, I was allowed to associate with people who didn't want to associate with me previously, because they thought that I was at some sort of greater risk to them, which I believe was an inherently illogical position. And that's been the frustrating thing. So you seem to acknowledge that I'm actually not any greater risk to you, but you've never actually said anything about it. You've never apologised for your hostility towards me, for openly saying in some instances you're not to be around me. And now all of a sudden, it's almost as though I'm expected to say, "Oh, gee, thank you for letting me back into your life. I really appreciate that." So that's been pretty disappointing. And you know, I expected better of certain people in not taking that position in the first place. And then I hoped that they would then turn around and say, "Do you know what? We got this horribly wrong. We got caught up in this this hysteria over this, and the messaging. It was wrong. We treated you poorly. We shouldn't have done it. We won't do it again." But I haven't had any of that.
Do you think you ever will get that?
No,
Okay.
I don't. And
so you've accepted that, yeah.
Yeah, and some of the people, within your own family, it's probably the hardest. And some of the people in my family who weren't like that, I've actually said to them, I've said, do you believe that they now believe that maybe I was right to begin with, that it was totally unfair for them to want to distance me from other members of the family? And they said, yes, I do think that. I said, do you think they'll ever admit that to me? I said, no, they won't. They're too proud. And that's that's pretty hard to take, I think.
It sounds like what you're describing is that there was, let's say, like a legal exclusion. You're not allowed to go to certain places, otherwise the police will come and take you away. It also sounds like you're describing more of a social exclusion as well, where even absent any... I guess the point I'm getting to is, do you think that if those government mandates weren't put in place, that people would still have the same feelings they had about you not taking the vaccine, not involving yourself in that process?
That's a good question. It's hard to say, because in a way, they were two separate things. There was the mandates themselves, and then there was the messaging around that. And even when some of the restrictions around gathering in people's homes rolled back, there were things like, if you're unvaccinated, you can now go into someone's house if they'll allow you, if they decide that they want to take that risk. So yeah, there was a fear campaign. And yeah, I think obviously they're very closely interlinked, but they were two separate things. So it's hard to say. I think the mandating of it probably helped with that social pressure. And they probably helped each other, to be honest.
Sure, hand in hand.
Fed off each other. The mandating helped drive home that, you need to do this for others. It's because it's so serious. It's so serious that you need to do this for others that we're enforcing it as law, or as a direction. You can argue about the difference between public health laws and public health directions.
Sure.
But and then the reverse of that, I suppose, is it's so serious, this is a law. This has been enshrined in law, and you still won't go along with it. So yeah, they probably fed each other, I think. But you know, I believed at the time, and you know, I believe as strongly as ever now that you know some of the messaging around that, the fear mongering and the frankly dehumanizing of people in my position, it was disgraceful, I believe.
I wonder. I wonder if, and this might be difficult. Just considering what you've just said, right? I wonder. I'd be surprised if you could do this. Can you look at those people and kind of empathize with where they were coming from, or is it for you like a do you do you think it was like a group hallucination, or do you think that there was like general like people had genuine beliefs that they expressed in a way that was directed at you?
A group hallucination. It sounds like you're getting dangerously close to that mass formation psychosis terminology that all us crazy alt-right conspiracy theorists talk about. But yeah, you know, the first time I heard that term, I thought I wasn't familiar with it before, and I thought, yeah, like this captures it well, I think. And I think I could. It would be easier for me to be sympathetic towards those people if they could now acknowledge that they were wrong. That's what's hard about it. They have
Mm.
tacitly acknowledged it by saying, "Yeah, you know, you're okay to be around us now," but they haven't openly said, "You know, we got this wrong and we kind of lost our minds for a second." Um,
I think that would be probably the hardest thing that someone would ever do is like go through the entire process of looking introspectively, discovering why they made certain decisions. First, they'd have to think those decisions were a bad idea, and then they'd have to question, you know, what led them to making them. And like, there's so many steps involved in that. Um, I understand what you mean when you say like they've done something to me and they won't just admit it. Like, just
mm,
say you did it. I don't think that people are capable of that, probably, generally speaking. And I
yeah,
wonder then, because from my perspective, that kind of puts the ball back in your court. You know, like you want this behavior from them. I don't think they're capable of giving you that behavior. And so then it kind of comes back to you, and it's like, well, what do you do about that situation now? Because you're the one that has to
yeah,
exist with it.
yeah. You're right, and yeah, I think it's something that I probably need to address at a certain point.
Mm.
Not one, I think you know I'd like to think of myself as someone who's pretty open to forgiveness, but I think forgiveness requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I think it's hard to
Sure.
forgive someone if they won't admit that they need forgiveness. But and you know, I say that as someone who needs a lot of forgiveness. You know, I've made and continue to make a lot of mistakes, and
Not me
yeah,
though.
and
I'm perfect.
yeah. Yeah, and I haven't necessarily handled myself all that well through this. You know, you get stressed and testy, and sometimes you lash out at the people who are most supportive of you, and you know that's not right. So I don't want to stand here trying to pretend to be some sort of Jesus-like figure who's offering forgiveness. But oh gee, I've lost my train of thought now. Once you start talking about Jesus, you
Yeah.
kind of get sidetracked. But so we were talking about that. Yeah, what I would do. I think with certain people in particular, it needs to be said. And even you know we are talking about family members here, and I'm not someone who wants to write off family members if I don't get the response that
Sure.
that I want, as much as anything, because you know, in spite of that and around of all that, these are people who have otherwise done a lot for me,
Mm.
and that's why this is so hard and it's so disappointing because it's so not like them. Um, so you know, I don't want all that good stuff to disappear because of that, but this is a really big thing. So I think at some point I probably need to bring it up and just say, look, I'm not okay with this, and I need you to understand that, but I also probably need to do it with the mindset that you're maybe not going to get the answer that you hope for.
Sure. Sure.
You're not going to get mea culpa. I'm sorry, we did wrong by you. You might just end up needing to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
But the reality of that situation is, unfortunately, and I don't even think you know the people involved understand this necessarily. That it has, you know, the relationship is different.
Mm.
You know, we're on the surface everything is very good, but underneath it doesn't feel the same to me. And I don't think that that's an unreasonable position.
I think that the hardest thing in the world is saying that, like admitting in yourself that you're wrong. I think the second hardest thing is to point to someone else and say, "Hey, man, you actually wronged me, and you need to admit it." That's like a difficult thing for you to do as well, is what I'm getting at.
It is one because it involves confrontation, and some people seem to thrive on confrontation. I actually don't. I prefer to avoid it if I can. So there's that. But I think the other part of that is, when you stand there knowing that you're not the person that you want to be necessarily, sometimes you can find it hard to go after people because you feel like a bit of a hypocrite. Well, who again, I'm getting a bit Jesus-y here. Who are you to judge? All that sort of thing. With the mistakes in your life, and I think that a lot of people went along with something that I see as really, really inherently immoral. But they did it, and genuinely thinking that they were helping people outside of themselves, and with this mindset of thinking about those around them. And that's a quality that I think these people that I'm talking about, these people that I'm quite disappointed with, generally speaking, they possess much more than I do. I think day to day, I'm a more selfish person than they are, and I think that's, for me, that's probably what has been so sinister about some of this stuff. It's, you're doing it in the interest of everybody else, and that argument never made sense, because it's, I mean, to a very small degree, it's been used with vaccines in particular before. You need to get vaccinated, not just for yourself, but for that very small percentage of immunocompromised people who can't get vaccines. Even that's I think is a weak argument, because if you get 95% of the population vaccinated with something that actually works, then you've got your herd immunity anyway. But to say you need to get vaccinated to protect the other people that are vaccinated, that to me, right from the start, that was incoherent. But so many people fell for it. And even if the vaccines worked, it wouldn't have been true at stopping you from getting it or transmitting it. It wouldn't have been true. And now that they didn't work, it hasn't been true. And I guess this is something else that has bothered me as well. People say, "Oh, we don't need the mandates anymore. They've served their purpose." And now, now they're fighting the good fight on our side. Like, no. You have to say that we never needed them because they didn't stop the spread.
Do you think? I've got two questions for you, and both are equally long and complicated. So I'll let you take your pick. So, I guess the first thing I'm interested in is where your reluctance to engage with the mandates come from. So if we say that the people that wanted them, at least on the outside, were talking about we need to help that small minority of immunocompromised people, let's maybe give them the benefit of the doubt and they thought that this would kill a lot more people than it did, or something like that. Where does your reluctance to engage with that come from? Is it like a religious thing? Is it a political thing? Where does that stem from for you?
I suppose it's a political thing, because I think there are religious overtones to that as well. I was raised a Catholic and I would call myself, I guess, Catholic-ish.
Sure. That's how a lot of people who grew up Catholic end up.
Yeah,
Catholic-ish,
but I don't want to get too philosophical and metaphysical here, but I moved away from religion pretty heavily, and I moved back to a position where I said academically, it makes more sense I believe it makes more sense to believe in God than it doesn't. But I struggle with saying that to people, because after living as though you don't believe in something for a long time, old habits die hard, and my life hasn't really changed in any kind of meaningful way, I don't think. So, but I think, the whole idea of the freedom and the dignity of the human person stems from that, and that's where ideas about liberties come in. I think having a vaccine that people believe carries the potential for risk and forcing that upon them, that is highly, highly immoral. But yes, in principle, even if it was 100% safe, guaranteed, yes, I think it is wrong to force that on people, because that is a violation of their liberties. So yes, I do believe that, but it's made, but I do have an element of the pragmatist about me.
Sure.
I would say.
Sure.
But I don't believe in applying any kind of crude utilitarian sort of calculus to this and saying, okay, this is a vaccine that carries some risk, and we know that it's going to do damage to some people, but overall, based on our calculations, we think it'll do more good than harm. Yeah. I think if there is even the slightest risk associated with these things, even if you determine that overall the risk is less than the virus, you have to give people the choice. That's fundamental for me. So, does that answer the question? Is there more to it than that? Or
I mean, it's your answer, man.
I want to make sure I've actually engaged with your question.
No, you certainly have. There's no doubt about that.
Okay,
you've definitely answered my question. I guess because in a very surface level political labeling, let's say, I was, until the last maybe 2 years ago, I was probably more of a libertarian than anything else. I believed in like ultimate freedom for the individual and all those sort of things. And I think for me, that's changed since. I'm not that anymore. But for me, it was always about, I just wanted people to have the best crack at life, basically. And I've been trying to find the right method to let people have the best crack at life. Then I thought it was something else. Now I think it's something different. But I guess the point I'm making is I can understand when people say that it's against their human rights or their inherent rights, whatever they want to call them, I can sympathise with that position, even if I don't believe that they necessarily exist. You know what I mean? I've come across, I mentioned to you earlier, I've dipped my toes in the realm of some of them are just outright nutcases. I can't put it any other way. Of what do you call them before? The alt-right crazy people who believe in group hallucinations or something.
Mass formation science.
Mass formation science.
I don't. I was using that pejorative label as making a joke about.
No, I understand.
People see that. I think it's an umbrella term that incorporates a lot of different groups, and I think some of them have a lot more merit than others.
That's what I'm learning slowly as well by engaging in that area. But I wonder I guess I'm someone that's very outcome oriented. It's good that we're acknowledging where splits are and all these sorts of things, but I guess my question is, what are we meant to do? What are we meant to do with these people? So, and they spectrum all the way from people who just, for whatever reason, don't politically agree with mandates, all the way through to people that think like history books are made up and that the reality we live in is different than what we're being told and all. As someone who's trying to engage those people in society, how do we do that? Or do you have any thoughts on
that? I don't have a specific strategy for that, but I think your question ties into this general idea of lack of trust in public institutions. And there's a guy by the name of Charles Eisenstein who, just by way of digression here, I pretty much described myself as a libertarian as well up until quite recently. I think the libertarian understanding of money and how money does and should work is woeful, and I have drifted more towards what might be termed more left-leaning economics, but which doesn't really tie in with typical kind of socialist approaches. I think the money system is inherently broken, and I think that the way that socialism tries to deal with that is to redistribute the product, redistribute the wealth that's produced by that system rather than overhaul the system. So
Where does that put you? If we can put like a really, just so I can put you on my political compass map somewhere. What is that?
okay. Well, you need to be careful with what you say here, because there's only really been one type of political group,
Mm.
I guess, that has attempted the kind of financial reform that I would like to see. Unfortunately, they've attracted a pretty bad rap for often very justifiable reasons, and it's meant that their economic policy, their approach to overhauling the economic system, has fallen into obscurity. But the only political movement that I think has actually made a really good fist of trying to address this sort of economic problem that I'm talking about is fascism. The I would strongly.
That's not where I thought you were going with that.
No, I didn't think you would say that. I didn't think you would expect it, but I would encourage you to look into some of the kind of economic theory and economic.
Yeah, look, I'm broadly familiar with some of it. I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but I'm aware of like nationally issued banknotes that aren't money. They're like, I'm aware of some of this sort of stuff. Again, not claiming to be an expert, but
the big issue is interest, and
sure.
and that's what and the effect of interest on the system, and that is what a lot, not necessarily all, but a lot of early, in particular, fascist economics tried to deal with, addressing that problem of interest. And now there are a lot of people outside fascism who look at interest-free economics and want to totally distance themselves from fascism, which I think is a good thing. I don't think it's ever going to get any kind of popular support because of the reputational hit that it suffered. But it's just it is unfortunate that that's really the only political movement, major political movement of the 20th century that actually seriously tried to address this, because some of what they talk about in terms of economics is actually I think it's really, really important, understanding the impact of interest on the financial system and how much that feeds into everything else that is wrong with society. And yeah, so I'm stridently anti-communist, but I would call myself an anti-capitalist as well.
Does that is that third position? Is that what we? Is that what you would call yourself, third position? I've heard of Nazbols. I've heard of all types of niche guys. Do any of those make any sense to you? Or
I've never heard the term third position.
Okay.
Nazbol, is that National Bolshevik?
Yeah, it is national.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Look, I've heard people talk about it, but it's not. It seems like a contradiction of terms to me, because one of the most striking things I found, we're getting into the weeds here, but one of the most striking things I found about when I read the Communist Manifesto was how little it dealt with economics. It was all about justifying all the pillars of Western civilization that it wanted to tear down, the family, the nation, all this sort of stuff. So I don't really understand how you can have a national Bolshevism, because one of the key goals of Bolshevism was destruction of the nation. So
I think it's really more of a meme. I don't know if people actually believe that. Okay. I think it's a meme. But I guess that leads back to what I was asking before. So you're just telling me now that you're I don't think you're calling yourself a fascist necessarily, but you look into...
Absolutely not, because I'm also talking about this is my hangover from libertarianism, basic civil liberties.
Sure, exactly.
I believe in those things, so you can't.
You don't fit nicely.
No, because it is fascism is, like you're talking about. It is goal oriented, and you can achieve your goal. It's outcome oriented, and you can achieve your goal using horrible means. And I think the means matter. The means absolutely matter.
Sure. So, okay. So when I look to who represents me at the moment, I look at basically the Labor Party. Right? I've told you I'm a member of that political party. I don't agree with everything they do. I'm not a simp for them or anything, but generally, in a similar way to what you're describing, I guess, generally speaking, they represent my values in the political space, but also more generally as well, right? Like they get things that I think about onto the agenda. Who does that for you? Like, is there someone? Is there a group? Who is speaking for you at a national or even a smaller level?
Not really anybody. I'm pretty disengaged with I'm probably more engaged with the election this time around because you know I'm going to be a one issue voter.
Sure.
And it's going to be based around mandates and freedoms relating to COVID and all that sort of stuff.
So Clive's your guy?
Yeah, Clive McGraw. No, yeah. Look, I've actually. So you would be, I'm sure, familiar with the group Reignite Democracy Australia.
The name rings a bell. I can't say I've like engaged with them, but the name rings a bell.
Yeah. So Monica Smith is the driving force behind that. She's copped a lot of flack. She's spent time in prison for breaking, something to do with encouraging people to attend a protest or something like that. I think they offered her to take down her page or spend 30 days in jail, and she chose 30 days in jail. So, big credibility boost by doing that. I think she was very smart in that. But they have these different community groups and the like. So I've spoken to a few people there, and we've talked about who are going to be the candidates that are going to represent that kind of freedom vote, if you like, and it's going to be predominantly United Australia and the Liberal Democrats, which are they're the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, really. I was a member of the Liberal Democrats maybe 5 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, I probably considered it at one stage, but yeah, like I said, my economic position has changed so drastically.
Yeah,
and they don't really address that. But the civil liberties side of things, absolutely, and that they have David Limbrick in particular. I think
I've seen him.
As much as I'm inherently mistrustful towards politicians, you have to acknowledge and pay credit where it's due. And he has been very prominent in speaking out against what's going on in Victoria, trying to actually get it raised in Parliament. And you don't, for me, like I don't think I'll ever join. I couldn't see myself ever joining a political party. I will be prioritising where possible. It might not be possible in my area necessarily, but I will be prioritising where possible United Australia and Liberal Democrats, because at the moment they are saying the right things. Do I expect that if they were in a position where they actually had some sort of influence, because there was a hung parliament and they were required to form government, do I expect that they would automatically follow through with what they are promising? No, I don't expect that, because I'm too cynical. But at the moment, if somebody is saying I will do this and you think this is important, you have to give them that opportunity. Give them the opportunity to prove themselves wrong, I suppose, or give them the opportunity to prove themselves a fraud. So that's what I'll do. But look, I don't have a great deal of faith in the voting system. I don't have a great deal of faith in representative democracy as an institution, to be perfectly honest. So the obvious follow-up question for that is what replaces it, and my weak answer is I don't know. But I think that I'm gonna get a little bit wanky and philosophical here, but I don't know if you've read any Aristotle at all.
I'm always interested in philosophy, and then every time I try to read the books, they're just like the most mind-numbing. Like, I must have Nietzsche, I've got Plato's Republic, all this stuff that I might have read the first 10 pages on and gone, eh. So what I'm saying is I'm aware of the ideas, I haven't gone in depth into it, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, Republic is an easy read compared to Aristotle. Aristotle's stuff it's pretty hard. It's a bit of a slog, but the ideas in there, I think, are quite profound. And in a section of the politics, he talks about different types of government and which ones are good and which ones are bad. And both democracy and oligarchy, or rule of the rich, he describes as being bad constitutions or bad types of governments. And he talks about The inherent problem of democracy is that it stems from it takes a legitimate belief in people being equal in one respect, i.e., free human beings, and extends that to being equal in all respects, i.e., they should all have an input into the political system. And the problem with oligarchy, basically, it takes them being unequal in one sense, i.e., having more wealth, more property than others, and extends that to they should be unequal in other regards, i.e., having sole control over the political affairs of the state. And I think it's true. You're a free human being with endowed with inalienable rights, if we may add a religious element to it. Okay, great. So why should that automatically give you the right? Because you might be a free human being, but you might also be a fairly stupid and ignorant human being. Why should that give you the right to make political decisions that could disadvantage me and enrich you when you don't actually have to do anything about it other than cast a vote?
I understand that sentiment. I really do. I think for me, I've often said to people, like, I think in a perfect world, not everyone should have access to the political system in the way that they do now. But having said that, I can't ever see a way that we can select for who shouldn't be involved that doesn't impact people that it shouldn't. And so my response to that is therefore that, well, because we can't responsibly choose who should be allowed in, we have to let everyone in on basically a moral basis. Because let's say in your system where you're kind of saying if you're kind of stupid or you're not, all you do is cast a vote, you don't really think or consider these sort of things. If your system excluded even one person who did think about these sort of things, I would say it's an immoral system because you're doing exactly what you're trying to avoid, which is preventing someone from exercising their inherent and deserved political autonomy. Do you see what I mean by that?
Yeah, I do. I think that I don't have a solution for you.
Sure.
All I'm doing is pointing out the inherent problem, and I think it's a significant one that we don't think about. And I actually think once it's pointed out to you, as you know, it was to me. I remember reading that, and you're quite right. There were large sections of politics where you're drifting off and you're zoning out because you think, oh, gee, this is pretty dull. But I saw that line and it grabbed me, and I thought that is absolutely correct. The idea that voting, that having an input into the running of a political entity, is a God-given right that everyone should have. Where did this come from? It actually hasn't been the norm for most of human history. I don't have a solution to it because we are so far gone down that path now.
That's okay. I don't expect you to have just. Yeah, I asked a question. It's like, yeah, of course, I know the answer to that. Yeah,
yeah.
I don't expect that at all.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine coming out of it without a complete collapse of the system. Which, look, I haven't ruled out, by the way, but we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. So I guess to come back to what we were talking about earlier, so we were talking about that small group of people, and let's say even outside of a political sense, how do we? I'll give you a little anecdote I have. So I was a truck driver for a little while. I was driving like medium rigid, doing like warehouse deliveries and all that sort of stuff, furniture removalist work, all sorts of stuff like that.
I was doing furniture removal myself for only about 3 months, but
yeah. Well, you know what's up then. So I was doing that. Yeah. I did that for like close to 3 years, something like that. And in that time, when I went to go get I had to get a heavier truck license, and I was doing the test and. I should have failed the test. They let you have like two. You're allowed to have like one fatal mistake and one 4 mistakes or something like that, right? And I think I went over a stop line or something like that, and should have been failed the test immediately. Drive back home. But what had happened at lunchtime was the woman talking to me who was running the test. She was telling me about how like Australia isn't a real state and it's like an incorporated company in the United States, and that like our constitution isn't the real one and all this sort of stuff. And I was just gobsmacked. I think just because I listened to her and didn't shut her down as like, you're an idiot, she passed me on the test. That's my working theory. But I've come across a few of these people who I'm not making fun of their beliefs, but their beliefs don't. You cannot believe that and also exist with other people that live with different beliefs, if that makes sense. So, if your belief is that everything you're being told is not true, it makes it really hard to engage on a personal level with people that do believe the things they're being told are true. So, outside of a political discussion, I guess, how do we bring these people back into society more generally? Do you think we need to make space for them, or do you think they need to make space for us, or like what?
Yeah, probably if you want to be in society, and I a part of the mainstream of society, and I think a lot of these people, a lot of the people in the position that you describe, I shouldn't say these people because I believe some pretty out there things as well. I think the difference is that I have sort of made a conscious decision to remain for as long as I can within society, and so I accept that I need to tone down some of this stuff.
Hiding your power level.
Yeah,
you heard that phrase before? Hiding your power level. You're familiar with that?
Yeah, no, I actually am not familiar with that term, but yeah, I need to allow people to accept that. If I believe this particular thing, 99.9% of people I encounter will not only believe something different, but will think that what I believe is crazy. And so,
does that make you feel crazy?
Not after what's just happened. Sure. Because it was so obvious to me that everybody around me was crazy rather than me. No, I have. We haven't even mentioned this yet, but 2019, the big reason for me sort of having a change of direction, I felt, I don't think I actually had one, but I thought I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And it was there were a multitude of factors that played into that, but one that was really significant was I felt like my whole belief system and understanding of the world was just completely collapsing, and I thought I did not know what was real and what wasn't anymore. It's a very scary experience to go through. And yeah, in rebuilding from that without, no, I probably haven't picked up a whole heap of firm beliefs from that, more just firm disbeliefs, if you like. This isn't true, that's not true, without necessarily knowing what is. But I sort of made the decision, like, for the most part, if you find someone where there is an opportunity to engage in this stuff, go for it. But for the most part, you just have to understand that most people are not open to this sort of stuff. So I think that's part of it. If you're in that position, and there are other people out there who believe things that as much as I say, I'm skeptical of everything now, people say things to me and I just think, well, yeah, that's a bit.
That's next level, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there is a requirement on the part of people who go against the grain, so to speak, and I include myself in that, to understand the world that you live in, and make your decision. If you want to continue to be part of that, you have to allow things to slide, probably, without necessarily challenging everything. And if you don't, and if you want to live in some little parallel society with other like-minded people and cut yourself off, that's fine too. But I think where this issue comes from, though, I started talking about Charles Eisenstein before. He's someone I really got into because of the fact that he talks about a lot of this money stuff that I think is really interesting. He's got a really good book called Sacred Economics, which I would highly recommend. But he wrote an article, I think it was called The Conspiracy Myth, and he talks about the COVID conspiracy. Those who believe it would, their conspiracies have always existed, and he said, he even believes in some of them himself. But the COVID conspiracy is the mother of all conspiracies, according to those who promote it. So he said, so I want to talk about my thoughts on that. And I think it's a myth, is what he says. And when I say that it's a myth, I don't mean that it's a flat out lie. I mean that, like creation myths and things like that, it is a story that is not necessarily factually true, but which tells us a profound truth about the world that we live in. He said the profound truth that it tells us is that our institutions of authority have completely lost the public trust. And he said, whether or not the COVID conspiracy is true or not, he said, I'm not even going to tell you what I think about that because I want you to make your own decision. He said, but whether or not the COVID conspiracy is true, the organisations that are involved have proven themselves inherently untrustworthy. The FDA in America, he's American based, is a horribly, horribly corrupt organisation. Pfizer is a horribly, horribly corrupt company. They no longer have the right, and the US government is horribly, horribly corrupt. They no longer have the right to be trusted. So I think it goes two ways. Yes, people who go against conventional wisdom or the conventional narrative, if you like, probably need to recognise that if they want to coexist alongside others, that maybe they just need to keep some of their thoughts in check in certain situations. But our institutions of authority, they need an enormous overhaul. I don't have a solution as to what that is, but I totally agree that they do not deserve to be trusted. And it is their responsibility to win that trust back. It is not our responsibility to just believe them because they said it's true.
Do you think that it matters if people trust them or
not? In what sense?
I guess, so that what you've just described to me is like the United States government's corrupt, all these big like companies are corrupt, FDA, other decision makers, people that in many ways dictate the frame in which we can live our lives. So, okay, let's say the public doesn't trust them. Does that actually change anything? Does that matter at all? Like, I guess what I'm getting at is I'm not sure that it does, because at the end of the day, let's say I didn't trust the Australian government that they were representing my interests or my values or something like that. It doesn't matter because they're going to do what they're going to do. And I don't, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter at the moment because you haven't reached that critical mass yet. I think it's growing. I think more and more people, but they are still a minority. They are still on the fringe, and this is a big part of my lack of faith in democracy. Democracy is majority, well, in its purest sense, and let's distill it to its purest sense, even though that's not how representative democracy works. But in its purest sense, it's majority rules. And I don't want my freedom to be able to work without having a vaccine. I don't want that decided democratically, really. I mean, I will use democracy to get the right outcome, but I won't settle for, hey, guess what? They just voted. The Andrews government just got overwhelmingly voted back in, so and they're going to keep mandates in place now because this is what people want. I don't accept that because what's right isn't about what's popular. I don't believe. Yes, but I've gone off the point here a little bit. Yeah, I think we don't have that critical mass yet of people who have completely disengaged and refuse to trust. But I think it will become a problem if it continues to grow. And I think it will continue to grow because we weren't going to talk about the reasons for vaccines, but
you can mention them. It's more just that like what I don't want is for you to say. How do you explain this thing, or I think this, and it's like, well, I don't have an answer for that, man. I'm not a scientist. I took it for my own reasons, and I'll ask this as well because I think it's going to tie in with what you're about to say anyway. But I wonder if you'd been in a different financial circumstance, do you think you still would have not refused the vaccine? Like if you were basically required to work, how would that have factored in?
Yeah, really good question, and a really hard one to answer. I just don't know, and I've had very few, mind you, because most people have thought that I was quite silly for the decision that I made. But I have had a small number of people say to me, good on you for having the courage to stand your ground. And I said to them, thank you, I appreciate that, but I didn't have any courage. If my wife hadn't have done this, I wouldn't have been able to do it. Or actually, maybe she could have. Maybe we could have just lived off our savings because we were quite well set in that position. But yeah, and that has been a really sad thing for me to see. People saying that that they held out for so long, and ultimately got it because they said I couldn't do it anymore. I had no money and I had to work, not just for me, but for my family. And they're getting slammed by people who call them an anti-vaxxer. And now they're getting slammed by other people who held out and saying you're a sellout. And, you know, I can't cop that. And, you know, maybe I can't cop that because I just know that I wouldn't have I probably wouldn't have had the strength to hold out without the certainty that I would be okay financially. So yeah, absolutely. I think in a different situation, it could have been different. And so I would never hold that against someone. As much as it frustrates me thinking if enough people had have just said no. And I'm really surprised it didn't happen in the construction industry. I thought it was going to happen, and that was going to be the sticking point for mandates, but it didn't. And as much as that frustrates me, and I think, you know what, if they had these people, and you know, this is a big part of my problem with the labour movement, political labour movement at the moment. None of the unions went into bat for their members on this issue. If they had have basically taken their own collective action outside of their union, they could have resisted this. I don't hold it personally against any individual who did it because I can understand. You know, it was stressful enough for me making the decision, and it was not even a financial one. It was just about, you know, it was based on how people around me were reacting to it, which is crazy. You know, it's a powerful thing what people think of you, and I think we pretend sometimes that it doesn't bother us, but it does. And that's a real weakness for mine. Is it does get to me and it does bother me, and I want to be liked, or at least not openly disliked by people who don't even mean that much to me. It's crazy, but yeah, I can't honestly say what I would have done if I had been in a different position.
I'm just conscious of the time. We'll get towards wrapping up. Is there
sure.
anything you wanted to end on? Anything you wanted to say, or?
Yeah, I'm curious as to, you know, given your involvement with the Labor as a political organisation, have you had any reservations about that? Because like I said, to be a gung ho Labor person, or even Liberal, you know, they have both gone along with it. Liberal and Labor state premiers have both done it. Scott Morrison, if we can add another religious overtone to this discussion, which I think is appropriate given his position. Scott Morrison's just the Pontius Pilate of it all. He's just washed his hands of it, which is that's a load of crap. He could have done something about it if he wanted to. So the major parties generally, but I find it difficult to reconcile having genuine concern for, which you seem to, for people who are suffering as a result of this, but being all on board the political parties that clearly couldn't care less about us.
It's a good question. I guess for me, when I decide who I want to vote for or who I'm going to align myself with, this for me is a very low priority issue because it doesn't affect me at all, right? Like, I still go to work, I do all my stuff. I got 2 vaccines like a year ago or whatever. It doesn't impact my life at all. So, and that, I'm sure that's not like a pleasant thing for you to hear because this is your existence. But for me, it doesn't matter. It's like it's a 1% issue, right? Much more important for me is job growth, what the next kind of 10 to 20 years looks like in terms of how we design our cities, what our environment looks like, what our tax policies looks like. Will I be able to go to the dentist on Medicare? You know, these sorts of things are much more important to me than I don't know the exact number. I think it was like 8% of people didn't get double vaccinated in Victoria, somewhere around that mark anyway, 8 to 10. They're just less important. I don't know what to tell you. So in that sense, what that means for me, and I know that sounds very dismissive, what that means for me is that I feel like I can engage with this issue as someone who's kind of dispassionately interested in it, because I am interested in outliers of society in a certain sense. I mean, I guess when you're 10% one side, 90% the other, that makes you outliers. And I'm interested in why those people made that decision, how it's impacted them, if they would have done it again, if they would have done it in different circumstances. And for me, again, coming from, like I said, a libertarian background, maybe, the idea that the government can just like mandate these things, can lock you inside your home, impose a curfew, all these sort of things, that is worrying to me in a genuine sense. But I don't think that the other alternatives, like the United Australia Party, for instance, or the Liberal Democrats, I don't think that they would actually do a better job of running the country. That's what it comes down to for me. I think lots of people involved. How am I trying to say this? I think there's a lot of really genuine people in both of those organisations, but I think there's a lot of grifters with them as well. People that will say what people want to hear, and that will give them either money, political power, whatever it might be. And I think we saw that in the last couple of terms where we've had United Australia Party members in Parliament. Most of them leave the party within like 6 months, a year. They lose their next election, they try to run as independents, and they're not interested in, or what they said they believed before and what got them in isn't what they actually believe, and they run on a different platform when they're up for re-election. I think of like Fraser Anning is a good example of this. Jackie Lambie is a good example as well. She was up there with Clive Palmer, now she thinks he's one of the biggest bullheads on the planet, you know what I mean? So, to sum up, I guess, I'm interested because it's interesting, you know? It's something, because I didn't wrestle with it really, internally. I think if mandates weren't around, would I have got vaccinated? Probably not. Like, not because I'm against it or for it. Like, I don't get a flu shot. It's just not, I just don't do that. And so for me, it's interesting because we had the same, like, the same launching point. We both were forced into this mandate situation at the same time with the same, like, concerns. And yet, once we took off, we went in two different directions. And it's like, how did that happen? We were meant to... everyone was meant to be on the same. So it's really interesting to me from that perspective. So I guess... And like I said, I don't agree with everything they do either. I think for right now, for example, the time for work mandates, whether or not they were justified initially, whatever, I don't know. Now, I saw a meme the other day. It's like anyone can get on a tram, but you have to be vaccinated to drive it. Like, how does that make sense? It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, and you're right. It doesn't. It's purely punitive at the moment.
That's right. That's right.
You didn't do what we said, so we're punishing you for it. But I'm glad to clarify that, because I think your position is pretty much everyone's position. You know, I've seen, not everyone, but a lot of people's position. I've seen a lot of people talking about, you know, I don't care about the vaxxed, and if they're having their adverse reactions and the like, I don't care about them because they didn't care about me. They actively cheered for me to lose my job and all this sort of stuff. And then people saying in response to that, no, hang on, that's not fair. You know, I got the vax and I thought it was the right thing for me, but I never wanted mandates and I didn't think it was right for people to do that to you. So they're two ends of the spectrum, I suppose. But I actually think the majority of people fall in the middle and fall into your position. They just didn't think about it either way.
Yep.
They don't want us to lose our jobs and be cast out of society, but they also aren't sitting there thinking it's really unfair what's happening to these people. They don't think about us at all, and that's what it feels like. That's the overwhelming feeling at the moment, that we've been forgotten about. I don't think the politicians have forgotten about us.
No, I don't think so either.
They are deliberately punishing us. There's no doubt about that. But I think the everyday Australian person has forgotten about us, and you know, that's a little bit sad. But I suppose that's a bit of a sort of sobering point. It's a bit of a wake up call as well, because it makes you think, well, how many things do you forget about that are affecting other people day to day? And
that's a good way to think about it. Yeah,
there's a lot, because I do think of myself as an inherently selfish person, someone who wants to be better than that, but knows that they're not. So yeah, you know, there's an opportunity for me to try and do some soul searching from that when all this not even when all this is over, because I don't know how this is going to end up. Just for the record, you know, I think we could be heading into a dark place over the next couple of years. This may very well be the tip of the iceberg, what we've seen the last few years. I hope I'm wrong about that, and
I hope you are too.
and I hope I'm wrong about my fears for long-term effects. Because I said to a friend the other day, I don't want to be. I'll take no joy in standing on top of a pile of dead bodies and saying, "I told you so." I don't know that I don't know that it's going to go that way. But I think there are adverse reactions out there that are being ignored. I think there are some longer term effects that are emerging that can still be ignored at the moment. But my fear is that they will reach a point where they can't be ignored anymore. And I hope I'm wrong about that, because I'd much rather in 10 years from now just be still feeling a bit frustrated at people because they said, well, you didn't go out and get a harmless vaccine. I'd much rather 10 years from now people still being able to convince themselves that it was harmless. Even though I think the evidence is already there, I hope it doesn't grow to the point where it's so compelling that nobody can ignore it anymore. But anyway.
So you'd rather feel a bit silly than feel like Genghis Khan on the pilot.
I wouldn't feel silly. I'd still feel like I made the right decision, and I'd still feel, even what has emerged to this point, I would feel justified in making the decision. It just wouldn't have convinced a lot of other people that I made the right decision, and I'd rather that than everybody be totally convinced that I was right. Because something pretty drastic would have to happen for that to be the case, and I don't want that to happen. So.
Well, here's hoping it doesn't, Mitchell. Look, mate, thanks again for making the time. Really do appreciate it. I had a good chat with you.
It was a good chat, Jack. I really enjoyed it.
We'll do it again sometime. I had a good time. Yeah. So, and I'll have a think about some of the stuff you said. You put a lot of interesting stuff out there. So,
yeah.
All right. Good. Thanks for your time, mate. See ya.
Thanks, Jack. See ya.